Hi, welcome to our weekly 3-Minute Therapy podcast. And 3-Minute Therapy is my book, which is all about rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, and that was devised in the 1950s by the brilliant psychologist Albert Ellis, who's written over 80 books on the subject. And just to tell you a little bit about REBT, it's based on the idea that our emotions and our behaviors come from our thinking, not from situations. And that's a very powerful idea and a very positive idea, because if your emotions and behaviors come from your thinking and you don't like how you're feeling or how you're acting, then you can change your thinking. And there's a particular type of thinking that leads to emotional and behavioral disturbance, and that's thinking in terms of demands: must, should, supposed to, have to's, escalating our preferences into demands. And there are three main areas where this exists with people. The first is a demand on oneself, and that takes the form of, because I strongly prefer to do well and get approval, therefore I absolutely must. And if you disapprove of me, this proves I'm no good, I'm a loser. The second area of demands is a demand on others, and that leads to resentment, hostility, and anger. And that takes the form of, because I prefer that you treat me fair, easily, and hassle-free, therefore you must, and if you don't, then you're no good. And the condemning others leads to anger. And the third area is an impersonal area of one's life, not a demand on oneself or others, but rather a demand on the conditions of one's life. And that takes the form of, because I prefer my life to go well, therefore it must go well. And if it doesn't, my life is awful. I might as well escape in eating, drugs, procrastination, or worse, suicide. So that's the basis of these interviews. And we interview people on all areas of professional life. And I've just been joined by my podcast partner, Mick Berry. Happy to see you, Mick.
My apologies for being late.
Yeah, but better late than never.
Thank you for your forgiveness.
Yes, I'm glad you showed up here. So, and we're interviewing today Amy Keller Laird, who is a health journalist. Is that correct, Amy?
Yes. I recently founded a mental health lifestyle site called Mental, and I'm the former editor-in-chief of Women's Health.
Wow, that's great. Mental.com?
Clubmental.com. Eventually, you
Clubmental.com.
will be able to join real Club Mentals if my plan goes according to plan.
Very good. Very good. Mick, did you want to say any more about yourself?
No, I've just been practicing REBT for decades. That's about all you need to know. I'm a practitioner, not a therapist.
Professional, right?
Not a professional. No one pays me. No one pays me for it.
Yeah, but in a sense, you are a professional author. Mick and I wrote a book together called Stage Fright on public speaking anxiety and how to beat public speaking anxiety.
Well, it's super interesting because I actually recently found a study showing that before public speaking, and maybe you guys like did this study, I don't even know, but
no, we didn't.
Okay, if you're freaking out, if you're having a lot of anxiety around public speaking, and you tell yourself, I am calm, that doesn't work. If you tell yourself, I am excited, then somehow in this study, people did better. They were more confident. They were judged better by their peers, et cetera. And, what the study showed was it associated, and Dr. Michael, I'm sure you know this better than me. It associated anxiety and excitement, both as sort of high level emotional states. And somehow if you could make yourself feel excited about something, you could reduce the pressure on yourself.
Right, right,
which I
yeah.
found fascinating because I always think when people just tell me to calm down and I have anxiety and OCD, I'm not just going to calm down.
Yeah, right,
Well,
right.
and to be hopefully concise in explaining what I think happened there, people can have anxiety about anxiety. And if you tell yourself, I'm calm, you're reinforcing the idea that I must not have anxiety. If you define the anxiety as I'm excited, then you at least don't worry about whatever feelings you're having so it doesn't escalate. I think
Yeah.
a more elegant approach could be that I can have anxiety and it's not going to hurt me. So I don't even need to redefine it as excited. I have anxiety. All right, I can deal with it. And it doesn't escalate because if we do talk in the book, if you tell yourself, I must not have anxiety, that's a great way to make it spiral out of control.
Totally. It sounds a lot like, again, being a health journalist, but also having OCD myself and having gone through numbers of types of therapy, including CBT and, cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and response therapy. And the idea of like going toward your anxiety versus pulling away from it, I think is what you're explaining, right? Being much more effective. If you say to yourself, like, don't think this thought, don't do this thing, don't feel this way, it's just giving more power to the thought and the action.
I think the reason for that is there's an inherent must there. You must not think this thought. You must not feel this way. And as I was saying, and as REBT explains, it's this kind of must demand thinking that leads to anxiety.
Well,
And
I love that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, Albert Ellis did say the craziest thought you can have is, I must not have a must.
Oh, I
Yeah,
love that.
that's a secondary. Right.
Well, it's the idea of shoulding yourself, I've always been like, we have to stop that because it goes to exactly what you were saying, Dr. Michael, that like if I should do something, right, I suck. If someone else should do something, they suck. And now like basically the whole world sucks. And it's interesting because I recently did a story about New Year's resolutions and looking into the data and talking to experts. And they were talking about how if you frame a resolution from a should or from a negative place, like I should stop doing this, it's going to be less effective and more pressureful than if you frame it from that positive sort of like, what can I add to my life? So I find it really interesting that that's kind of the basis of REBT.
Yeah.
Well,
one of the things, I'm sorry, Mick, go on.
I was just going to say, it's REBT says having a desire is good. We don't try to eliminate desires. The trick is, the stronger our desire, the easier we turn it into a demand, a must, a should, a have to. And I want to point out, Amy, I don't know the exact words you said, and this is not to reprimand you, but it's to show how semantic precision can be very useful. I believe you said we have to stop doing that regarding shoulds.
Well, there's a very good point.
To be semantically, and we could rewind the tape and see, but to be semantically precise, because I try to catch myself doing this, even though that's an innocuous expression, really. But we'll do best to stop. We have the freedom to continue. We don't have to get rid of our shoulds. There's no reason we should get rid of our shoulds. We'll do best to get rid of our shoulds.
Right. We shouldn't should ourselves about shoulds, is basically what you're saying. And as a journalist, I appreciate that because words definitely matter.
Well, and I'll say it isn't that we shouldn't should ourselves about shoulds. We'll do best to not should ourselves about shoulds. Not that we shouldn't should ourselves about shoulds. We can, we'll do best not to. Michael Edelstein is quite amused by this. Maybe that's a reason for REBT, Michael, to create amusement. Is that it?
To do what?
Create amusement.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, that's the reason for my doing these podcasts with you. That's Amy, let's get down to some of the things that I read in your writing. And one was you had a term, climate anxiety. Is that right? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, climate anxiety. So apparently now there are climate aware therapists, and climate anxiety is not in the DSM, as you know, and it's a relatively new term. It's also called eco-anxiety, but therapists are talking about people coming in, and there are studies showing, that like half of Americans are very concerned and not just concerned, but like have fear and dread and all of these things about what's going to happen. I mean, this is interesting for REBT, what's going to happen in the future because of climate anxiety. And so it's really, it affects young people a lot. It affects marginalized communities because they're already living in places that happen to be, you know, more affected often by climate anxiety because of, all kinds of reasons, and people who already have anxiety disorders and are prone to this. And the tricky thing with climate anxiety is, as you know, with regular anxiety, the treatment is often to help someone understand that what they're anxious about isn't really a fear. But with climate anxiety, if you believe in climate change, these are realistic fears. We're being hit by Hurricane Ian, and things are happening all the time. And there's really sort of like no break in this now because we keep getting hit with these things. So, we did discuss with therapists and look into the studies of what can you do if you have climate anxiety, and, how can you soothe that in yourself, and also, take these small steps toward, helping yourself by helping the environment too.
Nick?
Yeah, I have an answer for that.
Yeah.
But first, I have a question. Amy, did you say half of the population has anxiety about this?
Well,
It's
this is according to one study that was run by the American Psychological Association, saying that 48% of people in the US are very concerned about the climate. That's not necessarily they have climate anxiety.
right.
But
Okay. And so I think, Amy, you're too young for this, but I grew up during the Cold War.
I was around for the Cold War. I'm younger than I appear because I'm also a former beauty editor who's worn a lot of sunscreen in her life.
Okay, you mean you're older than you appear? Is that
I'm
right?
older. I'm older. Yes,
I
I'm
believe
older
you said you're younger than you appear.
Oh no, I'm older than I appear. Yes.
You appear quite young. See,
Yeah.
keep me around, Amy. I'll keep correcting your diction, or your sentences. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, growing up in the Cold War, people who have a big fear of climate change try having a big fear of nuclear war every day during my childhood, every day during my adolescence, during my teen years, and throughout my 20s into my 30s until the Soviet Union folded. I had a fear of nuclear war. Well, no, it didn't continue. What stopped it was a friend of mine said he talked with a man who was a Unitarian minister, which is neither here nor there. But this guy said, you've got to realize that every generation throughout the history of mankind has felt they had proof of the world ending. Every generation throughout the history of the human race has felt they had proof of the world ending. And my friend said to him, yeah, but this is nuclear war. It could happen. He said, yes, it could, but every generation is certain they have proof that the world is going to end. And I mentioned this to a friend of mine who's 30, a former drum student. I'm a drummer for a living. In any case, I told him every generation has certainty that the world is going to end. He said, yes, but this time it's real.
Yeah.
Which,
Nick, if I may get a word in here edgewise. Amy, so how do you deal with climate anxiety in your advice in your health journals?
Well, it's all the usual stuff that you would do for general anxiety. So like we could move beyond that, but the ways that you can sort of take action, which make you feel like you're taking agency over the situation, right? Are little small things. So for example, and this will save you money and also help the environment. Like, okay, it's the winter. If you have a programmable thermostat, you turn it down 7 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit lower at night. And you're basically going to save 10% on your energy bills, and then you're going to like help the world. Another thing is, and I don't know if we all want to cut our meat consumption in half, but if there is a stat that like basically if every American could just not cut out meat entirely, but cut it in half, we could really slash agricultural carbon pollution. So that kind of thing. And then finally, voting. I mean, it sounds obvious, but right, like who is going to be making these policies? We need to be voting. And there are all kinds of studies also around voting being generally good for mental health. Mostly because you're taking a feeling of empowerment, you're taking away that feeling of helplessness and doing things. So, and then we have the usual things, obviously, like get out in nature, do the classic things that help with anxiety. But, with climate anxiety in particular, if you can feel not that you're being perfect and you have to change everything in your life, because of course that creates another kind of pressure. But if you can do these small things.
So what you're saying really is to change the situation. If you improve things in the ways you just mentioned, then there might be less of a climate problem. What we're saying is the elegant solution is to get rid of your anxiety by getting rid of your must, getting rid of your thinking, since it's our thinking that causes our anxiety, not bad situations. And since practically everyone is anxious, they'll find something else to get anxious about. But if they learn how to uproot their anxiety by changing their thinking, then that would be less of a problem, and they'd be generalizing less from one bad situation to another and making themselves anxious about that. Does that make sense?
100%, 100%. These are sort of things one can do in the moment. I'm sure it takes a while for REBT to work. And as someone who has OCD, if I could only change my thinking, well, I'd be living a happier life.
Well, I think you can change your thinking.
I've
But it
changed my
takes
thinking
work.
quite a bit, but I've been in
Takes
therapy
practice.
for many years.
Yeah,
But I personally, I mean, this is interesting to me because I personally don't believe I can change my entire thinking patterns and just be done with OCD.
Okay, well, maybe we can have another interview where Mick and I could help you get over your OCD, because there are some things most therapists miss with OCD that REBT pretty much nails. I wanted to get onto another subject that you've written about, and that is eating disorder. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Could I say one quick thing about climate change?
Well, we don't have that much more time, so
10 seconds.
yeah. Okay, yeah, all right.
Good to take care of problems that could be a problem, and it's good to take care of emotional disturbance around the problem. Both of them. Michael Edelstein and I are both vegan, and I've been a vegetarian since 1976, so I'm bragging. Go on, Michael.
That's why I have you on, for some makes me laugh. Okay, Amy, you were gonna talk about eating disorders.
Yeah, I mean, we just did a big report called New Year, New Eating Disorder. I mean, it's around the concept that at this time of year, you hear a lot about New Year, New You, and anti-obesity messaging, pro-dieting messaging. And, we found some studies that show that not only does this kind of messaging exacerbate eating disorders, but it can actually lead to it. And if you look, I mean, I was digging deep in the New Year, New You, because, I come from women's media, I come from magazines. We did use that phrase, and we often use that phrase not in an attempt to shame people, but looking back, right? A New Year, New You has often become about New Year, New Body. And you see tons of weight loss messaging and dieting and restrictive dieting in particular around this time of year. And as I was doing all my research, I was finding that the NIH uses the phrase New Year, New You. The Cleveland Clinic uses the phrase New Year, New You. It's literally everywhere. And so I don't know what REBT would say about eating disorders, but I'm going to tell you, it's a pretty dire situation with eating disorders on the rise. And this kind of messaging really contributing to it.
Yeah, but again, REBT says the reason you have an eating disorder that you can do something about. You can't do something about your genetic predispositions, which certainly is a factor and an influence with many people, but you can do something about your thinking, and that's normally escalating preferences into demands. Because I prefer to have the strawberry shortcake, I absolutely must. Because I have an urge to eat high-fat foods, I have to. So again, if you uproot your musts and shoulds and show yourself again and again and again, as you said, Amy, it's not easy, it takes a lot of practice. But if you do that again and again and again, show yourself you don't have to do what you want. There's no reason why you must feel good right now. And you work at that. and we have special methods to work on that, then you can change your thinking and be much more in control of your eating. Yeah, Mick?
Well, I would also say watch out for the secondary disturbance of I must not obsess about food or whatever the thoughts are, or I must not have an eating disorder. We are all fallible humans and we want to be less fallible. But as I said, if you want to be supremely fallible, tell yourself, I must not be fallible. And that's a great way to really drive yourself nuts. Do you find, I'm curious, Amy, do you find that people with eating disorders berate themselves for having an eating disorder?
Yeah, there's a lot of shame associated
Yeah.
with that and with telling people about it or slipping up too. One of the interesting things from the story we found were that psychologists who treat people with eating disorders often don't see them in January. And that's because they've often fallen for the messaging again and fallen back into their patterns of disordered eating. And then they feel shame for having done that. And they don't want to tell their therapist. So there's a lot of berating, I think, on all sides of it. Like, why did I do that? Right. I mean, this is interesting, right? Why did I do that? Why did I slip up? Why can't I stop thinking about this? I don't know. It seems quite difficult. It seems from the experts I spoke to who specifically deal with eating disorders that even once you're in recovery for an eating disorder, seeing a story about, very thin celebrities or, we've been seeing these like headlines come back in the paper, heroin chic is back, those trigger people back into their old patterns, even if they don't fall back into doing the behavior. Even if they're in recovery from eating disorders, their thought process does go to sometimes, I want that still.
Yeah, and therefore I have to have it.
Well,
So,
hopefully
again,
with their therapy, they're able to say, I want it, but I know it's not healthy.
And I don't have to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Mick.
Yeah. So I used to have a huge problem with depression. Never got to the point where it was debilitating and I couldn't live my life or at least work and have an income and put a roof over my head. But I have had severe depression. And one of the key components to eliminating it was to get rid of the depression about the depression so that I no longer worried about being depressed.
Yeah.
And then I could address the primary cause of depression, which is I failed at this task, therefore I'm a loser and my life is awful. But I will say it took a lot of practice. Now, by practice, I don't mean 2 decades. I mean a couple of months of recognizing, oh, I'm getting depressed, or no, I can't handle being depressed, and recognizing, wait, I'm telling myself I can't handle being depressed. That's not true. I can handle it, so I'd feel a little calmer. And then the next day, thinking, oh God, am I going to get depressed? Oh no, oh, wait a minute, I'm getting anxious about being depressed. That'll lead to being depressed about being depressed. Okay, I can be depressed and it won't kill me. I just won't feel good. And it was several months of learning to have the helpful thoughts of eliminating the demand not to get depressed, recognizing it and getting rid of it, and then addressing the primary cause of depression. But it did take practice, but it wasn't 2-3 decades of practice. It was more like 1, 2, or 3 months of practice till I started really getting the hang of it. What I found,
I mean, that's
Amy,
interesting because, what I see, the rise of self-care and meditation, everyone should be meditating. I mean, these are the messages you hear. Why aren't you meditating? Why aren't you deep breathing? Why aren't you helped by a bubble bath, etc.? And like the stress of not being able to de-stress in the same way everyone else is real, right? You're like, well, what's wrong with me? Why is meditation not working for me? And for myself,
as it must.
Yeah, for myself, I've come to the conclusion that maybe I'm just not a meditator.
Right. Yeah, Mick, did you want to put in a last word here?
Yeah, well, I won't mention the name. I did a type of meditation for 14 years. I went to a college where everybody meditated, and I attempted to levitate to attain spiritual enlightenment. And I gradually came to realize that by attempting to have spiritual enlightenment, I was driving myself nuts. And to be able to accept myself as a fallible human being, I attained all of the tranquility and peace of mind I was ever hoping to achieve by meditating, and I gave up the meditation.
Oh.
I'll mention the name. It was Maharishi.
Oh, well, I don't want to get sued.
No, well, I'll get sued. I'm the one who made it. Okay, we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank you, Amy Keller. Amy Keller, Laird, is that it?
Yeah.
Amy Keller Laird, health journalist, for joining us and explaining some of these issues to us. And thanks, Vic Berry, my co-host on these podcasts. And thank you, Chris Rossini, our tech engineer. And I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, author of 3 Minute Therapy and clinical psychologist. Thank you all for joining us.